Okay, so yeah, thank you all for joining. This session is all about how to meet your MP, and we're joined by Jamie from our team, who's going to be going over just some of the tips that we've been learning along the way about how to best get meaningful engagement for MPs, which isn't always the easiest thing, but it's because they're very busy. And the reason why we're doing this is basically this moment's really exciting for the bill. We have more support than we've ever had before in terms of we've got more supporting MPs, we've got more supporting organizations, and critically, we have more supporting scientists than we've ever had before because this is the real pivotal part of how we're working. Um, Essentially, our message is we've got 100 days to follow the science. We need to back the science and back the CAN bill. And you've probably seen in some of our emails that we've been sending out, um, we essentially, this window, this ballot bill process gives us an opportunity to progress the bill further. It allows us to have real meaningful debate time. But in order for that to be successful, we need MPs to be entering the ballot and to be prioritising the CAN bill. And many of you, we've now have, I think, just under 3,000 people who have wrote to their MPs. So they're definitely listening. And some of those MPs have already, which is really exciting, already told us that they are going to be entering the ballot and prioritising the bill. So we know that writing to your MP works. But even better is if we can actually meet them in person and have that human interaction to answer any questions and to give as much information and really send this message home that scientists are backing it. And something which I'm sure we'll get onto across the evening is we've got this really exciting scientist letter. It's actually, we have now over 800 scientists across many disciplines who are all calling for this exact thing, for MPs to prioritize the climate nature bill. And the reason that they're calling for that is because it is the only joint up plan for climate and nature, because they're inextricably linked. We have to have a science-led approach. So across this evening, we're going to be hearing about just some of the tips about how to set up a meeting, how you can make that meeting a success, and other ways you can get involved in resources that we have. But I'll pass on to Jamie from our team and he can cover some of that. We will be having a short Q&A, but we'll do that at the very end. So please put your questions in the chat.
Thank you, Alan. I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. There we go. Please do shout if you can't see it. So my name's Jamie. I am the grassroots manager here at 0 Hour, and I'm going to be leading this training tonight, which is, as you can see, how to engage with your MP. And it is very much about, as Alan was saying, this really specific moment that we have right now with the ballot bill process coming up, which means that we have a real opportunity for getting the bill on the agenda in a way in Parliament that we've never had before, getting it some debate time and really putting that pressure on to see it made into law, hopefully within the first 100 days of the new government. So this training is in 4 parts. What we're going to cover this evening, we're going to have a look at arranging a meeting. So just some of the kind of boring practicalities around how to do that, how to actually go about getting a meeting with your MP. We're going to look at some of the ways in which you can prepare for it. Alan mentioned the scientist letter, which is something I'm going to be talking about a lot further on into this, but that really is an exciting tool for us because that's something that we're going to be asking you to take when you go to meet your MPs. And we're also going to have a look at what exactly we are going to be saying in the meeting. So some of the principles of engagement, some of the ways in which we can engage with our MP when we meet them face to face, some good practice, and some of the specific messaging that we're going to be looking at around asking them to engage with the CAN bill and why they should do that, but also why they should be prioritising this in the ballot bill process, because obviously we're aware MPs are going to have a lot of different bills that they might be thinking about putting forward. So we really want to present them with the reason why the CAN bill probably should take priority over anything else that they might be considering. And then finally, we're going to have a look at some of the follow-up that we can do after the meeting. Again, another little opportunity to put a little bit more pressure on in terms of lobbying your MP. Yeah, so 4 parts of this training. I'm going to whiz through it as quickly as I can. and hopefully by the end of it, you will feel you've got some skills and some knowledge and some confidence to actually go in there and have a chat with your representatives. So I'm going to ask you a question first. We can pop some answers in the chat for me. I've just wondered how many people here had ever met their MP. You can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you have or you haven't. And I wondered how you found the process. You can maybe put an adjective or two in there to give me some idea of what the experience was like for you. Now, I must confess, I have never actually met my MP. For a long time, I had an MP who didn't like the CAN bill. It didn't seem an awful lot of point in engaging with them because they said they would never support it. But I now have a fresh, shiny new MP here in Shrewsbury who I'm actually meeting tomorrow. So I may be one of the first people who's actually meeting their MP in person as part of this process. And I'm going to speak to her about the CAN bill tomorrow. So I think Alan's having a little chat for me.
Yeah, we've got quite a few responses, which is interesting. Quite a lot of them haven't met their MP, which is interesting, and it'll be interesting if this is helpful for coming over some of those barriers. But some people, like we know Sarah, we both know Sarah Warren. She's met her MP. She said it was productive. And interestingly, Tim is saying in the chat, he's met his MP, generally helpful, even if the politics it isn't shared by him. And this is something we will touch on in the training, which is that's really key. How do you have common ground, even if you're from a different political background?
That's brilliant. Thank you, Alan. So, the big part of this push is really this in-person meeting. And the reason why we're asking you to do that is because it is completely different from sending an email. It's completely different from having a chat on the telephone. It really does bring that kind of personal. You probably know this, but if you're asking to meet an MP, you're asking to go along to their surgery. I think it's quite funny, when you think about what you associate with the word surgery, we often think about doctors or dentists or maybe even vets. And it's somewhere where you go when someone is ill. And in many ways, going along to meet your MP in their surgery is equally for the same reason. There is a problem, you're asking them to fix it. Maybe there's a sickness in the body politic, whatever it might be, and we're asking them to make it better. So that's really the reason why we're pushing this engagement issue. And I guess the biggest key, it was interesting what you were saying about people saying from different political persuasions. The biggest key, I think, to remember is that when you're meeting your MP, they are your representative. And it doesn't matter whether you voted for them or not. It's their job to represent their constituents' concerns in Parliament. And of course, as a result of that, then they are really interested in knowing what those concerns are. And in order to do that, they first. So MPs aren't actually obliged. MPs aren't actually obliged to hold surgeries. Not all of them do. You will likely be able to arrange a meeting if they don't hold a regular surgery. It's very possible just to ask and arrange a meeting. Possibly in somewhere public like a coffee shop, something like that. It's also possible you might be offered the chance to speak to them on the telephone or a Zoom. We're really keen that people actually do the in-person meeting because it really does have a power that no other kind of form of kind of meeting with your MP has. So in terms of the practicalities of this, how to arrange a meeting, you can find details for your MP's constituency office and even their official email address on the government's website, which I think Alan is going to pop in the chat for us. You can phone and email the office with a request asking for a meeting, or you can pop into the constituency office if they have one and request one in person. And what we're advising people to do is when they send that email asking for a meeting, you can say, I'd like to talk to you about the Climate and Nature Bill. And you can send them a copy of the scientist letter that Alan and I have just been talking about. This we've just published it today. So this is the first day that it's being shared around. Alan's going to pop a link to it in the chat. It is really amazing. 800 UK leading climate and nature scientists explaining why this is exactly the moment that politicians need to start following the science and listen to it. So you can send that along ahead of the meeting. You might want to send them a copy of the Climate and Nature Bill as well, which there's a copy of that on the website. Alan's going to share it in the chat. Just these little things that will maybe prep them a little bit for the meeting. Some of your MPs will already know what the CAN bill is, A few, possibly some of the newer intake, might not do, so it might be helpful to send them along a copy of the bill when you drop them a line asking for a meeting. And in terms of the messaging that we're looking at, it's the messaging for our 100 Days campaign is the 100 days refers to Labour's first 100 days in office. So this is a new government, a government elected on the basis of change. And what we're asking your MP to do, regardless of which party they're from, is to follow the science, because the science doesn't care about the politics. The climate and nature crisis don't care about politics. Physics doesn't care about politics. So this is really, we're very hopeful that MPs will see this letter signed by these senior scientists in the UK and recognise that there is a need for immediate transformative action. And it really is, if not now, when? In terms of that messaging, there are 2 international targets for 2030. So if we think about the lifespan of the current government, this is really the last government that is going to be able to achieve these international targets that the UK has pledged to. The first one is staying within the carbon budget for 1.5 degrees, and that basically involves a 68% reduction in emissions by 2030. So, a very narrow window of time. That was what we agreed at Paris in 2015, alongside, I think, 196 other nations, something like that. And the second target that we have is to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. Now, some of you I know will have been along to some of our check-ins before, so you'll have heard me talking about this many times. There currently is no plan in UK legislation to achieve either of these. There's no legislation that ensures that we will hit these targets, and we currently don't have policies in place that will mean that we hit them. So just recently, a couple of weeks ago, the Committee on Climate Change, which is the government's advisors, said that only 1/3 of the emissions reductions that we need are currently covered by credible plans. And the problem that we have is the Climate Change Act, while it was really fantastic in its day, is now looking rather old and weak. It doesn't even mention the 1.5 target, to 1.5 degree target, for instance. So, a clear reason why we need new legislation, which is what the CAN bill represents. And then on the second issue of halting and reversing nature loss by 2030, this is what we agreed at the Biodiversity COP in Montreal in 2022. Again, it's really depressing, but we are, quote unquote, largely off track to achieve this, according to the Office for Environmental Protection. Again, another government advisor. And there is no legislation in place in UK law to make sure that the government sticks to this. So the Environment Act that we had, again, was really brilliant when it first came out, but now is increasingly not fit for purpose because it doesn't even legislate for reversing nature loss. It just says we need to halt it by 2030. So this government really is the last one that can ensure that we meet these pledges. And this is what we're going to be taking when we go in to see our MPs. This is very much what we want to be flagging up to them. It's very easy for your MP to say, oh, well, we're doing this wonderful stuff around climate, or this wonderful stuff about nature. But the fact is, at the moment, there is nothing that is going to ensure that we meet these 2 international pledges, which means we'll be letting ourselves down and also the rest of the world. So in terms of meeting your MP, it's really useful to think about who you might want to bring with you. Now, you might say, that's absolutely fine. I have this lovely letter signed by 800 scientists, and I'm really confident to go in there and deliver that and speak to them. Or you might think, I'd like to bring someone along with me, someone from the local community. Now, maybe you could pop in the chat. Thinking about where you live in your constituency, are there people who you think would be useful to you to get in touch with and maybe bring along with you when you go to meet your MP? How are we doing, Alan? Anyone got any good suggestions?
We haven't. Oh, we've just had one. Local doctor, GP. That's 2.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I brought when I went, I brought along a local councillor because the councillor was responsible for a local motion that was supporting the bill, so I knew that he knew the bill too. It was really helpful, even as a team member of Zero Hour, it was still helpful to have someone who also knew, what the bill was entailing. So yeah, councillors is another one. Wildlife representative, climate scientists from local university. That's a good one. We have a list of our scientists on our website, so you can look there to see, is their names, and we can always try and connect you with people. Local Greenpeace rep, yeah, other groups, and Greenpeace are a supporter, so that's a good one. Friends of the Earth, Global Justice, so similar local groups. Yeah, and I think these local groups are interesting because you can also find some of them if they're already supporting the bill through your constituency page, which I'll about to put in the chat. So you can also go onto your constituency page and see, oh, actually, I don't know if there's a local supporter, I don't know them by name, but you can look and find them that way. Church warden, that's another one.
Church warden, I like that. That's great. I think everyone's ticked off. I think you ticked off all the examples I was going to give you. So yeah, thinking about as Alan said, having a look at your constituency page, which is on the Zero Hour website. If you go on there, you can find the page for your constituency. You'll be able to see local groups who've signed up. I know lots of you have been with us through our journey through the election process, where we were really signing up local groups within the constituency and reaching out to them and talking about the CAN bill. And in many ways, if you have had those conversations with local organizations, whether they be charities or businesses or whatever it might be, and you said, I'd like you to sign up to the support the CAN bill, now might be a really good time to have a chat to them and say, oh, I've got this meeting with our with our MP. Would you like to come along and talk about why the climate and nature crisis matters to you as a local business or as a local charity or whatever it might be? So really leaning into those constituency-based connections that we've been making just recently would be a really good thing. And the other thing, in terms of a tip, in terms of thinking about who it might be useful to talk to, is have a think about who those think about your MP's interests and consider inviting individuals and groups beyond the environment movement. So, maybe people, if the MP has an interest in the arts, you could maybe look at someone from the local arts community, bring them along. LGBTQ, disability representatives, poverty reduction groups, say your local food bank might be a really interesting to bring a representative from the local food bank to talk to your MP about what they're seeing in terms of cost of living crisis with food because of the climate crisis or whatever it might be. So having a think about that, really interesting for us as Zero Hour. We quite often think about the ways in which the environmental movement should be kind of fostering these kind of partnerships, in different areas across kind of interconnected issues, because the climate and nature crisis really does affect all of us. So it might be really worthwhile to have a think about thinking within your constituency who you might want to bring along with you. Of course, there's no need to bring anyone along with you. You're more than welcome to go on your own, but just that little bit of extra clout can sometimes help. So the next thing that we want to think about before we go to meet your MP, and this kind of ties into what we were just talking about, thinking about what their interests might be, is thinking about what your MP's priorities are that will help you frame this request about the CAN bill. Now, research your MP sounds very grand. It sounds like you have to do an awful lot of work. I'm just talking about 10 minutes of Googling. It would be really useful to have a look at your MP's track record. If they're a new MP, they may not obviously have that, but what they might have instead is an interview that they maybe did in the local press during the election campaign. It might be quite interesting to have a look at that and see what issues they're prioritizing. Maybe it was better local buses, maybe it was the cost of living crisis, whatever it might be, river sewage, who knows, but to have a sense of the things that they said they wanted to tackle when elected, and that might give you a way of thinking about how to frame this request about prioritizing the climate and nature bill. So another little question for you that I'll throw out, pop some answers in the chat. Can you think of different ways, what different ways can you think of that would be useful to explore your MP's track record, priorities, or background? Are there any sites, websites, or ideas that you might have for a good way to do that? I've got a couple that I'm going to share with you in a minute, but I'm always
We've got a couple in the chat. Social media, which is a good one. What are they speaking about? What are they interested in? What are they saying about climate, nature, local paper? House of Parliament website. They work for you. I've got a link for that in the chats. Look at their maiden speech. That's often you find quite often MPs will mention uh, nature as part of their maiden speech. Really speaking about you know wildlife and things that are often bring a lot of pride to the local area. So when you can make that connection, it's really good. Yeah. Yeah, so there's quite a few people with different suggestions. Yeah, local media is a good one.
they sound really good. I like the maiden speech one as well. That's really a really good way of looking at it.
I'm
So
very quickly just going to mention one because I think it's very interesting. I've never thought about it. Previous job, what have they worked in? They might have actually, that person may have worked for an organization that directly overlaps with this work, or they might have, ties to it. That's a great suggestion.
that's a really good one. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. It's sometimes seeing which industries people came from, and but also sometimes you can see what volunteering they've done in the local community. Some of the new intake of MPs are people who've been working in the constituency locally for a bit of time, trying to raise their profile, trying to make connections. And you quite often find that they've maybe been volunteering or connected with different charities and stuff like that. So that's also another really good way to get into. I think Alan mentioned, and someone in the chat mentioned, they work for you, which is a really great place, resource to find out about your MP. The Climate Coalition have a wonderful local intelligence hub. We have the Parliament UK website. So I think someone mentioned Hansard, and finding out, what your MP has been saying in Parliament is really useful. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's strictly climate and nature related that they're talking about, but it can be something that gives you a way in to talk about climate and nature as a result. And yeah, the last one I had here was your MP's personal website and social media pages. And again, just having had an election, you will quite often find that there's been a big update on those pages, and they've been talking a lot about the things that they've been doing if they were an incumbent MP, or they've really been selling themselves if they were a new MP who was standing a challenger. So those places are really good to find out kind of what makes your MP tick, I guess, is kind of what we're doing. We're kind of dissecting them a little bit to see what exactly is it that they're interested in. So I think we just went over this. So, thinking about these things, press interviews are really good. Quite often I've seen MPs giving a press interview about what their vision is. If you elect me, these are the things that I'm going to focus on. And once you know what the MP is concerned about, if it's cost of living or sewage in rivers or the NHS or transport, you can really find a way to kind of insert the CAN bill into those concerns, I think, because, the fact is that the Climate and Nature Bill does cover, it's a whole of society approach to tackling this crisis. So it does cover all of these key issues. Yeah, so if your MP has expressed a concern about river sewage, you can talk about, well, we have this nature target for 2030 and how we're going to achieve this without legislation. If they're talking about the cost of living, you could maybe talk about the spiraling prices due to drought and crop failure across the world, causing impact on food prices. We could talk about energy prices. We could talk about the need for more renewables, and the ways in which the CAN bill would ensure this happened as we push towards meeting that 2030 decarbonisation target. So lots of wonderful ways in which the CAN bill actually brings some lovely benefits to constituents, which is really ultimately is what the MP is going to be concerned about. You're my constituent, you're coming to me to tell me about this problem, this piece of legislation that's a solution, and their first thought is going to be, what will this do in terms of my constituency and my constituents? How will this help them? And I think the point that we're trying to make is very much that this is a global issue, but the benefits of tackling that global issue bring local benefits all the way down to the constituency level. So it's very much something that MPs can get behind from that point of view. So meeting your MP. Okay, I think all of us here can probably understand that MPs are feeling a little bit sensitive and vulnerable at the moment. The public discourse has changed somewhat, and there's a general lack of civility. So I think if we're meeting our MP in person, it's really important to maybe just take a breath and think about the ways in which to approach this that would be beneficial for kind of the wider public discourse, beneficial for your relationship with your MP, and really give you the best chance of building a good relationship with your MP. So, I mean, these are all quite obvious, but I'll just run through them. Obviously, we want to avoid kind of hostile interactions. The starting point for us at Zero Hour is that the victory here is not necessarily that you go into a meeting with your MP and you get them to say, oh, I completely agree with you, I'm going to listen to do everything that you asked me to do. The actual victory is to just go along and have the meeting with your MP and raise the CAN bill with them. That has a huge impact. And what we learned during our election campaign process was when Parliament came together and the new MPs took their seats, what we were hearing was that from MPs who'd been through the election process was that the climate and nature bill was now on the agenda in a way that had never been before. And that was because of all the work that you had done as campaigners during the election campaign, in terms of emailing your MP about the CAN bill, talking to them on the doorstep about the CAN bill, mentioning it at hustings. Suddenly all these MPs were taking their seats going, oh, everybody's talking about this bill, and it now is now on the agenda in a way that it's never been before. So, as I say, the victory is raising the awareness of the bill is a wonderful victory as a starting point. So we're not going into these meetings with our MP in a confrontational way of I have to browbeat you into accepting the reasons for getting behind the CAN bill. We're going in there to put on their radar that this is an issue. So framing conversations in terms of building rapport, really useful. As I said before, the benefits that it will bring to all of us is a really useful way of talking to your MP about this new legislation. Not going in there demanding stuff, listening to them is really useful. Listening to what they're saying in the same way that we're going to hope that they're going to listen to what we're saying. Not calling out an MP's lack of knowledge about the climate and nature crisis. There are people on this call I know who have been campaigning for a very long time, and in some instances might know an awful lot more than their MP. But the way that to approach this is really through sharing information and outlining your observations, and being collaborative, I guess, in many ways. Really sharing that knowledge that you have, and not calling out an MP's poor track record, not accusing them of stuff. Communicating positive solutions. I mean, that positivity is very much the key, I think, to this meeting. And, hopefully this meeting that you have with your MP will be the start of an ongoing conversation rather than a kind of one and done kind of approach to it. So building that rapport with them, letting them know that this issue matters to you, and also letting them know that you will be talking to them again about it again, and watching what happens with it, but also there to kind of link them up with the Zero Hour campaign if they want more information. It's a kind of an interesting two-way street. So those of you who've previously done some training with us here at Zero Hour, when we had some lovely training delivered by Hope for the Future, you'll know about this idea of common ground. For those of you who haven't seen this before, this is very much this idea of not going in with a demand, not going in, I want you to support this bill, for all these ways, but really showing your MP that this bill aligns with their own interests and values. So all that research that you've done before you go to meet them, you can think about that way in which they will see the CAN bill as something that's beneficial to their constituents, to their constituency, and also frame them in a really good way for the win for them in getting behind this something. So maybe another thing for the chat: if you think about your constituency and your MP, what would you expect them to support in the CAN bill? What in particular in terms of climate and nature action would be useful, do you think, for your MP? So I'll give my example here. I live in Shrewsbury. We're a town that has the River Severn running right through the middle of it, and the flooding on the River Severn, what used to be once in 100-year events, is now almost an annual event, cutting off one side of town from the other. So instantly I can say, well, obviously the climate and nature bill, my MP, there's a clear clearly addresses one of the problems that all your constituents faces. So thinking about some of your constituencies, I'd be really interested to know if you could think about, if you could pop in the chat, what you think some of the local issues maybe that the Climate and Nature Bill could help with.
So we have quite a few coming in. Air pollution, river pollution, sea sewage, wildfire risk. Yeah, I said air pollution. Flooding risk, that's a big one for a lot of places. How pollution's affecting drinking water supplies. Yeah, these are all really, really good. HS2 for some people, agricultural pollution and runoff. So yeah, these are the types of things that I'm sure Jamie will talk more about.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, these are the kind of issues that I think instantly your MP knows about them. They're live. You know, there is no they know that other constituents are talking about them. So going in there and presenting, you know, these are the problems that we're facing in this constituency, and they're only going to get worse if we don't address them soon. I mean, that's very much the scientist letter talks about the urgency of the situation in terms quite stark terms about, you know, existential crisis. So letting the MP see that letter, seeing the scientists calling for them to get behind the CAN bill, and then going in there and basically saying, you know, as a local constituent, you know, the things that are worrying me are, you know, the flooding that we're seeing in the town. The getting behind the CAN bill is a way that we can start to tackle that and prevent this situation from kind of spiraling and accelerating. It's really useful. I mean, if you're MP is a Labour MP, so a member of the new government, you could think about bringing in some real world approaches, examples of how the approaches advocated in the CAN bill could kind of benefit the Labour government, you know, locally and nationally. Labour has talked a lot about, you know, being change, so approaching climate in the climate crisis in a new way. We're already seeing some, you know, government initiatives around decarbonising the energy supply, for instance. You could talk about how the CAN bill is already leaning into what they're doing. On the nature side of things, Labour's talked a lot about their ambition to be more ambitious in terms of the nature crisis. So again, you could talk about, well, the CAN bill would actually ensure that we meet our international obligations in this way, which currently none of your policies and none of the existing legislation is enough to achieve that. So that two really good ways to say, you know, you're already doing great work. This is kind of the next step. Have a look at all these scientists who are telling you this in quite clear terms. You know, why wouldn't you want to do this? I think is a really good way of looking at it. If your MP, say, was a Conservative MP, you could maybe take a different tack. You could maybe look at talking about Britain's status in the world, you know, as a world leader. You know, by enacting this, we really could be a world leader in terms of the climate and nature crisis. You could talk about very British values about keeping our international promises and obligations. And also mention that, you know, these targets, the agreements that were made under Conservative administrations, these international agreements. So, you know, really good ways to kind of lean into that from that perspective. So there's different ways, depending on which party your MP is from, there's really different ways of thinking about how you might want to approach talking about the Climate and Nature Bill and showing how it reflects their existing interests. So finding that, again, that common ground really is the key. So something to have a think about before you go and have that sit down meeting with your MP. And I think the biggest takeaway I would suggest to you is please don't feel like you need to be an expert on the climate and nature crisis. You are going in there with a letter signed by 800 of the UK's leading experts, which basically outlines what the crisis is, why politicians need to act, why those international targets matter so much. So you have that in your armory, you give that to your MP ahead of time, you let them read it. And basically the question becomes, how are you going to reach these international targets by 2030 if it's not through supporting the Climate and Nature Bill? So yes, that's going to be an interesting conversation, I think. So the ask that you will be asking is a smart ask. Some of you will have come across this before. The SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed. And I have to say, the ask that we're actually going into our MP could not be a better SMART ask than any other I think I've ever seen before, because we are going in to ask them something completely specific, which is, will you enter the private members bill ballot, and will you support the CAN bill? So really, really quite clear and easy to understand question in terms of what we're asking them to do. It is measurable, will they enter the ballot themselves? Yes or no? We can see there's kind of no fudging that one with a long-winded answer. And then if they are picked up in the ballot process, so if they are one of the MPs who's lucky enough to be picked through this process and then be able to present any bill of their choice as the one that can progress to debate time, we're asking them, will it be the CAN bill? It's achievable. The majority of MPs have the opportunity to enter the ballot, and all MPs can support it. And it is relevant. The ballot bill is the best way to ensure the CAN bill is debated. And if they've read the science letter, they'll know that there is no other option than to be getting behind the bill, because this is the only way we're going to make that 2030 targets. And the last thing is it's timed. So this ask is time sensitive. There is no open-endedness to this. The ballot bill process ends on the 5th of September when the names are announced. And even after that, MPs can support the bill, whether or not it's picked in the ballot bill process. So we still have that option of, will you support the bill can become a kind of a secondary ask, if you like. So really clear, we're going in there, we're saying, will you enter the ballot bill, and will you back the CAN bill in that process? A nice, simple ask. Sorry, Alan, jump in.
No, I was just going to come in because a few people have asked this in the chat, which is what happens if your MP already backs it? So you've done that section, which we've just covered, and you already know that they're supportive, they're already an ally, they're already on your side. They're actually, the meeting should become much, much easier because you can go straight to what we're about to cover. You can go straight to the ask and say, you already get it, you know why the bill's important, we've got an opportunity to advance it and to get this debated, enter the ballot and say that the CAN bill is what you're gonna use your time for. So the people who are, people who are lucky enough to have an already supporting MP, meeting them becomes a much shorter meeting, and it becomes, you support it, you understand it, will you enter it into the ballot bill? And that, because this just allows us to leverage their support to get it debated.
No, completely. I completely agree. And in many ways, Alan, I would actually argue that the people who have a supporting MP, the best possible thing they could do is go and have that meeting with that MP to ensure that they do back the CAN bill in the ballot, because this is really the point at which we need those wonderful pledges from supporters to actually be matched by actions, and that action is to take the CAN bill forward through the ballot bill process. So in many ways, if your MP is already supporting, it would be really, really valuable for you to go and have that meeting with them to ensure that the pledge they made is something that they will carry through into action. So in terms of your meeting, I'm just going to reiterate this again. So we're going to go in and we're going to outline why you want your MP to prioritise the CAN bill in the private members bill ballot. So this is very much about, this is what the science says. We need to follow the science. And then we're going to remind them to enter the ballot before the 5th of September. Some new MPs may be slightly, we've had some reports that some new MPs have not yet caught up to what the ballot bill process is and don't actually understand that they can enter it and how they can enter it. Alan has a link to a blog that our colleague Felix at 0 Hour wrote, which I think he's going to pop in the chat for you, which is something you can send to any new MPs if they're a little bit confused about what the process is and how it works. It might be quite useful for them to see that. And then we're going to explain why the bill is important for you and your constituency, why this bill, other than any other bill that they could pick, really matters. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting in terms of timings, because timings is one of the things that is going to really matter in this process. If you're meeting your MP before the 5th of September, so which isn't actually very long, because this whole campaign is a very short one, then they really have a chance to enter into the ballot, which is obviously what we want them to do. Expressing to them the urgency of the situation, I think, is kind of key here. That's what that letter from the scientist does, and it really does explain the importance of the CAN bill and why this is the moment, because we don't really have another year to wait if we're going to meet those 2030 dates. So in terms of timings, you may be meeting your MP before the 5th of September, or you may be meeting them afterwards. If it's after the 5th of September, then we will know by that point which MPs have been drawn in the ballot and which ones haven't. Now, either way, it's still really valuable for you to meet your MP. If your MP is one of the 20 MPs who's drawn in the ballot, we can go in and we can say, please prioritise the Climate and Nature Bill. Of all the other bills you could pick, this is the one that really matters. This is the one that's really important. We need you to get behind it. If your MP is not one of those lucky 20, then we can ask them to back the bill. And if they're already a supporter, we can ask them to speak to those colleagues of theirs who are drawn in the ballot and, say to them, I'm backing the Climate and Nature Bill. I'm already a supporter of it. You have this wonderful opportunity now in the ballot bill process to do something amazing here and get behind this bill. Please, would you consider doing that rather than whatever other bills you might be thinking about? So the lobbying that we're going to do is going to change a little bit depending on the date, but there is no point between now and the 16th of October where it is not useful to meet your MP. And if you're at all confused by the time you've got the meeting with your MP that you're hopefully going to go off after this meeting and try and sort out, if you're at all like, oh, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be asking, please do just get in touch with us here at 0 Hour. We'll help you through it. We're here to support you, so we can help you through this. But it really is this moment at which we can assert maximum pressure on MPs during this process to get them to recognise the urgency of this situation. So you may be thinking, okay, I'm going to go in there. What exactly am I going to say? So this nice little graphic kind of compartmentalize everything in a nice little flow. So we're going to say, okay, top climate and nature scientists warn that the UK is off track to meet its 2030 commitments. Here's this lovely letter. Brilliant. The MP says, okay, I understand that. That's demonstrably true. This is where we're at. As a constituent, you may want to say, well, I'm feeling very concerned about this lack of progress on this rapidly escalating problem. It's a global problem, but it's also a local problem. It's impacting me. It's impacting my family. It's impacting those who I care about. It's impacting the community here in this constituency that I can care about. So it's something that I very much want you to deal with as my representative. And we're going to talk about the need that we have, which is, in order to meet our international commitments, the UK needs stronger legislation that aligns with the science. And our MP will probably have to say, yes, that's true, because at the moment we are nowhere near on track, according to all the government's advisors. And then the specific request that comes out of this is that we're asking the government to align with the science by supporting the CAN bill. Now, your MP obviously may not be a member of the Labour Party, but they can still be putting that pressure onto the government to ensure that this happens. So those are very much our key kind of flow of the argument that we're going in with in order to explain to our MP what we want them to do. Now, I know some of you said that you had supporting MPs already, and you may find that you go in there and this is a really easy conversation. I need you to back the bill. Yes, of course, not a problem. If your MP is one of these supportive and enthusiastic MPs, you might want to consider maybe having some other requests. If you're going to see a Labour MP who's already supporting, you could ask them, say, for instance, to write to the front bench about the Climate and Nature Bill, to reach out to other Climate and Nature Bill supporting colleagues, and kind of, encourage them in the ballot bill process. If you have a Liberal Democrat MP, you could write to the party leader, get them to write to the party leader, encouraging the Liberal Democrats to prioritise the CAN bill. if any of them are chosen in the ballot bill process. Conservative MP, you could ask them if you had a really supportive Conservative MP who'd gone in, you could say write to the Shadow Environment Secretary. Greens, write to the party leaders, encouraging again Greens to prioritise the Camm bill in the ballot afterwards. So, if you're lucky enough to have someone who's just their door is open to you and they're just like, yes, what can I do to help? These are some other secondary requests that we could think about asking for on top of the original one. Now, in all of this process, I'm saying this as someone who's meeting my MP tomorrow morning for coffee, and I'm like, yeah, I'd really like to come out of that meeting feeling that I've made a difference, and it's a little bit nerve-wracking. So if any of you are feeling a bit nervous, I share it with you. And it's true that the parliamentary process itself can feel quite huge and confusing and complicated. I mean, just look at all the stuff we've talked about tonight about the ballot bill process. And you might think, well, it's just me and it's just me on my own and I'm just meeting my MP and it's one person out of the constituency. Does it really matter? And I think one of the key takeaways I would suggest is that, yes, it really does matter. Your voice does matter. Raising the Camm bill with MPs keeps the bill on the agenda. As I said, it was astounding what we saw happen during the election process. So many people on this call and other campaigners for the Camm bill kept raising it. In every hustings, there was a question that was, will you support the Camm bill? MPs knocked on the door. People were asking them about the Camm bill, writing to them about it. It really collectively, we raised it up the agenda in a really amazing way. And I think that's very much something that we're aware that this process can do as well. So please don't feel like, oh, it's just me. It's not going to make a difference, because you will be among hundreds of other people who will be emailing their MP, writing to the MP during August, September and October. And I think we can really make a really big moment out of this. So the fourth and final part, and this is the shortest, you'll be glad to hear. After you've met your MP, what are we going to do? Well, the best thing to do really would be to send a follow-up email. You can do this regardless of how you felt the meeting went. It's just a little nudge, again, kind of keep it on their radar. If they've agreed to enter the private members bill ballot with the Camm bill, or just supportive of the Camm bill and are really wanting to help more, it would be great if you let us know at parliament@zerohour.uk. And our colleague Felix, who keeps track of all this wonderful parliamentary stuff, can follow up with that and keep a track on which MPs are supporting or making supportive and encouraging noises. And you might also, if you hadn't sent them the scientist letter beforehand, you could do that now. You can send them a copy of the Camm bill. There's also a Camm bill briefing on the website that's very useful for MPs who haven't come across the bill before or don't know an awful lot about it. It really lays out what the bill does. And really, I think that follow-up email is very much one that will be really useful in terms of continuing the dialogue with your representative. And that's something, as I said at the beginning of this process, that's very much something that we are keen to see this meeting with your MP being. This might be the first of several meetings. This might be the beginning of a dialogue around climate and nature action within your constituency. Hopefully it will be the beginning of a dialogue around them taking their support, if they're already supporting the Camm bill, progressing that further, or if they're not, pushing them towards realizing that the science is saying that this bill is drastically necessary